But right now, the top focus, Chandrayaan-3, has been a big success. With the success of this mission, India has once again asserted its position into the science and technology era, in the space era. But how can politics be left behind? It was not even a day since India achieved a historic feat with Chandrayaan-3 landing on the unexplored south pole of the moon. While the entire country was beaming with pride and celebrating, a mega credit war was also brewing. You had Congress Chief Mallikarjun Kharge, who reminded the central government and the BJP that it was India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru who sowed the seeds of space exploration, and the country is now reaping the fruits of those efforts. You also had Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, who wrote a letter to the ISRO chief, stating that ISRO's success is anchored in the self-reliance dating back to India's early 60s. How can there be not a response from the ruling BJP, which came out all guns blazing at the Congress party, claiming that India has achieved more than it ever did between Nehru and Dr. Manmohan Singh time? While the nation celebrated this scientific milestone, was the glory marred in some way by this political bickering and agenda? As the nation basked in the glory, and we continue to do so, of this historic achievement, was the credit war really necessary? We talk about the story, the Chandrayaan-3 mission, and more importantly, we also get you global voices from the scientist community, from the space scientists, the astronauts, and what do they think about India's success of Chandrayaan-3.
लैंडर मॉड्यूल पूरी तरह से सेफली और सॉफ्टली चंद्रमा की सतह पे लैंड हो चुका है।
चंद्रयान-3 की सफलता प्रत्येक भारतीय की सामूहिक सफलता है। ये उपलब्धियां पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू के विजन का प्रमाण है। भारत के अन्य प्रधानमंत्रियों ने भी इस भावना को आगे बढ़ाया।
47 अंतरिक्ष मिशन श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी की सरकार ने 9 सालों में लॉन्च किए। इतने मिशन किसी भी सरकार ने लॉन्च नहीं हुए। यह यूपीए की सरकार में लॉन्च मिशन की संख्या से दुगना है।
We'll definitely talk about the politics around this entire issue, the credit war which is brewing in. But before that, we have a very special guest with us today on the broadcast, an astronaut who has lived in space, performed spacewalks, and so much more. A NASA veteran who flew on all the 3 space shuttles. He undertook his first mission in 2008 and was aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour, which dropped him off a 95-day stay aboard the International Space Station. Someone who has performed spacewalks during his second mission in 2010. He's also performed about 3 spacewalks so far. We are joined by none other than Garrett Reisman. He's with us on the broadcast. Thank you so much, Garrett, for sparing time, for joining us on the broadcast today. We are speaking at an historic time, at an occasion when India has created history with Chandrayaan-3. Your thoughts on this mission and its success?
Well, this is extremely significant. You know, it's that India just became only the 4th nation to successfully land on the moon. And more so, they did it in a difficult way, which was at the South Pole region of the moon, which due to environmental conditions and due to lighting conditions and due to the fact that the landscape is pretty difficult down there, that's not easy to do. And so it's really an impressive accomplishment.
Well, India has got its success, and soon after the Russian mission Luna 25 failed. Compared to other nations, India worked out on a very tight budget, and the mission shall explore the South Pole or the southern side of the moon. In your understanding and expertise, how critical it is for the world's scientists, the space scientists, to understand this particular region of the moon, and how does India aid that process significantly?
Well, there's a reason why the South Polar region was chosen, and that is the relatively recent discovery of water present there. And that is really significant because water as a resource is really important, especially as we look towards future human missions. And that's the reason why United States and I think also China and other countries are concentrating on this part of the moon, because if you can get water out of the moon, and that's what we hope to learn with the Paragon rover once it goes out there and deploys its instruments in the Vikram lander, we should learn more about how much water is there and how easy it is to access it. But if we can, then from the water, obviously we can drink it when humans are there, but also you could create oxygen from it and also hydrogen, which is could be very useful.
Yeah.
So we're going to learn a lot about what we have to work with when we go there with people.
Well, has the success of this mission positively enhanced India's image and impression across the world? The perception with which, Indian space scientists are viewed with has always been very positive, but has the success of the mission augmented that image?
Oh, yeah. So this success is definitely a feather in India's cap. I mean, this is a wonderful accomplishment. And especially, contrasting, it comes on the heels just 2 days ago of the failure of the Russia Lunar 25 mission.
Yes.
And I think what you're seeing is certainly progress on the side of ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, and India as a nation in this high-tech field. And somewhat of a diminishing or a waning of the Russian effort in space, unfortunately. It is a bit of a changing of the guard in that sense.
Sure. These are indeed very interesting times in the space exploration and exciting missions which world superpowers are preparing for. For example, we have US, which is preparing for the Artemis mission to land a man and a woman by 2025. China, I believe, is planning something similar. Can India find strategic allies in the space sector for possible collaboration, say with countries like US? Do you think US would be interested?
Oh, yes. So the U.S. is definitely looking to expand and would love to partner with India more on the Artemis missions and other science and human spaceflight missions. India certainly has a lot to offer. I have a lot of Indian students in my classes at USC, for example, who are very interested in human spaceflight. Yeah. And I'd love to see their talents be utilized to help our efforts at NASA as well.
Well, there was a time in India and I believe across the world when the space industry was highly nationalized, a lot of secrecy around it, but times have changed. What role can private players play in the space industry? For example, in India, the space programs were highly nationalized, as I argued. But in the increasing competitive space industry, what is the role, the constructive role that private companies and entrepreneurs can play?
Wow. Yeah. So it is very impressive that India accomplished this very difficult feat in science and technology with a relatively modest budget. I think if I remember right, it's only about $75 million.
Yes.
Which is a relatively small sum for these types of things.
Yeah.
Now, as I would love to see India get more involved in human spaceflight and actually sending people into space and doing human missions. Now, if you do that, the price tag goes way up. Because that requires a life support system. It requires bigger rockets, more mass, more safety requirements. So everything gets more expensive. And so, yeah, they will require more investment. And I think the private sector, is very robust in India. I'm aware of that. And it's worked well here in the United States, this public-private partnership model. And I do think that could work well in India as well. I see no reason why. In fact, India is a very entrepreneurial country. And I think the conditions are very ripe to do something very similar to what NASA has done with SpaceX and with other private companies here in the United States. And I personally have been a part of that as, I worked for 7 years as an executive at SpaceX, and I saw that model work very effectively. And I do think it's a good model for India as well.
My final question to you. You've been a veteran in the space industry. You've also worked with private players. When it comes to organizations like ISRO, which have been at the forefront of innovation technology, despite their limitations, do you have any constructive suggestions going forward for ISRO, for the Indian scientists? You have a lot of them in your classes.
Wow. Well, as an outsider looking in, it's hard to give advice without being present and involved on a day-to-day basis. But I'd say that one of the things I think ISRO does well is avoiding a lot of complexity, and that's one of the keys to SpaceX's success as well. Which is when things get really expensive and when reliability goes down and performance goes down, is when you make things too complicated from an engineering design perspective. So I think keeping it simple is one of the keys to keeping it from becoming too expensive, but also to keeping it safe. So I would advise that. And I would love to see ISRO get more involved, as I mentioned before, in human spaceflight. So those would be the two pieces of advice I would be bold enough to offer.
All right, Garrett. It's an absolute pleasure to have had you on the broadcast today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Well, let's dip into the story here in India. There's no doubt about the fact that 1 billion plus Indians are basking in glory. We are very happy that Chandrayaan-3 mission is successful. And I say this for all across political lines. But how can there be not a credit war that can brew? One is brewing between the Congress and the BJP as to who should get the credit for the kind of feat that ISRO scientists are achieving today. Is that debate really necessary? Are there substantial allegations that have been put on both the sides? And what exactly are the complexities of the history that we all must know about? Joining us on the broadcast is Shehzad Poonawala, who's the national spokesperson of the BJP, Kamru Chaudhary from the Congress Party. He's with us on the broadcast. Jonathan Levy, who's a space commentator, is also with us on the show. We also have W. Selvamurthy, who is a former expert and a DG from DRDO. He's also the Chancellor of the Amity University, joining us on the broadcast. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Shehzad, let me ask you to open the debate for all of us. There is no denying of the fact that under the present government, the scientists and the scientific temper has got the kind of impetus it needs. But can one really deny the efforts that were taken by the Congress Party or by the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru? That's the key question Congress Party is asking.
Oh, that's a question that is steeped in absolute hypocrisy and in a kind of making an argument that for everything the credit should go to Nehru. It just doesn't hold true. I'll tell you why. Every leadership at that point of time when ISRO makes an achievement or the space agency makes an achievement, the scientific leadership and the political leadership of that time deserves credit. And therefore, to make this argument that Nehru deserves credit for everything that's happening today, I'll give you a small example and I hope this is answered specifically. In 2008 when Chandrayaan-3 went into orbit and then there was a moon orbiter that touched down onto the surface of the moon from part of India. It was not named after any great scientist or any great person from ISRO. It was named as Jawahar Point. And today when we have landed on the south side of the moon, a historic feat for India which no country including US has achieved, the name of the lander was Vikram lander named after Vikram Sarabhai. Anusha, those who are saying this is about credit wars should also then answer that why was the budget of ISRO 5,500 crores which is today 123% higher at 12,500 crores? Why were there 89 launches out of which 47 launches took place in the last 9 years? Why is it that there were 1.2 launches per year which has now gone up to 5.7 launches today? Why is it that the new space policy came about by which the private sector could contribute and now 150 startups have been started? Why is it that these things never happened before? And finally, if you just 10 more seconds, if you want to take credit for everything Nehruji, from yoga to everything credit to Nehruji, then take credit for the fact that UPA did not allow Chandrayaan-2 to take place. Take credit for the fact that ASAT was stopped by the Congress Party in UPA. Take credit for the fact that you hounded people like Nambi Narayan and you put back India's scientific progress for a large period of time. Take credit for the fact that you did the Devas Antrix deal which was steeped in corruption. Then you have to take credit for that too. Look, every leadership, whether it is, just a last sentence, whether it is President Kennedy, who at that time inspired the leadership of NASA and the space leadership in the United States, or whether it is Prime Minister Modi hugging the former ISRO chief and saying, we will do this again, and today it's happening in 4 years. Every political leadership deserves credit, but to say everything happened because of Nehru is I
get your broader point, and you've raised certain substantial points as well. Mr. Kamru Chaudhary, let's talk about the fact that the first point that was raised by the BJP, that Chandrayaan-1 and the kind of naming that was done of that particular crater, it was called Jawahar, or the fact that the budget has been hiked by over 100%, or the new space policy which is being talked about, which is responsible for the private players to enter into the space sector, all of that is a giving of the present Modi government. Then why should any other political dispensation get credit for Chandrayaan-3? A straight-up question.
Yeah, Anusha, first and foremost, the entire world, along with India, celebrated yesterday the landing of a Chandrayaan-3 in the moon.
Yes.
So it's not a case of one particular India or particular leader that shall take credit for it.
because we as Indians felt proud because it was our spacecraft. But it was an experiment done on behalf of the entire mankind. We are proud of that. In India, coming to the basic point, when you speak about taking credits, you see what happened yesterday, just that minute, that last 10 seconds, I believe, when the Chandrayaan was about to touch on the face of the moon, we had a pop-up of Prime Minister Modi on the screen. The entire nation was aghast that how come when we are witnessing a history, why did Mr. Modi have to pop up all the time? Why did he not let the scientists bask in the glory at that time? This is the point where we raised that it was not because of Narendra Modi ji that the Chandrayaan is landing on the moon. It's because of the scientific temper that was developed over the years by successive Indian governments that led to the successful experiment of the Chandrayaan landing on the moon. That was the basic point. Now you can question the policies of the UPA government, you can question the policies of Jawaharlal Nehru government. I can also question the policies of Narendra Modi government. So there are a lot of issues that to be discussed along with Chandrayaan.
I've got one specific point from you, which is that 20 seconds roughly to the final landing, why was the Prime Minister's face popped up during those visuals that the entire nation was watching? That's the only point you're raising, sir?
No, that's not the only point. Anusha, the basic point is that you are watching a climax scene of a movie and suddenly you come up with a advertisement on this, or a last ball final is there on a cricket match, you find out an advertisement. How do you feel about it? It's not a question of Narendra Modi ji that he is taking the credit for the entire Chandrayaan mission. Thousands of people have worked for the success of this. We all prayed for the success of Chandrayaan.
Right.
It's not that Jawaharlal Nehru started this program. It was always successive government's policies, the scientific temper built up over the years that we left.
So, sir, my last interjection to you before I bring in the BJP again and other guests also into the discussion, that if successive governments, including the Congress, is responsible for the good and bad that we have done in the space sector so far, then what's wrong with the Prime Minister of the nation coming forward in the most critical times at the most important moment? My question to you, and then I'll take in BJP on that.
Yeah, Anusha, you see, we always criticize Narendra Modi ji as one of the most megalomaniac and a narcissist Prime Minister India has ever seen. That was defined and that was successfully exhibited by him, by Modi ji himself yesterday. There is no denying the fact about it.
Let me bring in...
But yesterday this event was, the entire world was watching. Now you wanted to have your face pasted on our TV screen just at the right moment when the lander...
You've made your point. Let me take in a response from the BJP. Shehzad, a quick response from you. Then I want to bring in Mr. Jonathan Levy and Mr. Selvamurthy into the discussion.
Anusha, I take you back 4 years ago when the Chandrayaan-3, it was a successful mission, but the lander did not make it safely. At that time, the Prime Minister wasn't popping up. He was inspiring the leadership of ISRO, and his sentence and statement to a crying ISRO chairperson was, "Phir karenge." We will do it again. I back you. I am glad that the Prime Minister, just before we made touchdown, joined them to say, look, this is not just on ISRO. It is our collective endeavor, and if it goes right, the credit is yours. If it goes wrong, hum fir se karenge. This is the leadership that, whether it was President Kennedy or whether it is Prime Minister Modi, they give to their scientists saying that we are backing you. And by the way, how did Jawahar Point pop up in 2008? By that logic, it was Mr. Vajpayee who said, let's have Chandrayaan mission. So shouldn't it have been Atal Point? And look, this is not the point. The point is you should have named it after a scientist like we named Vikram lander. And Mr. Kamruzaman Chaudhary, for Pete's sake, stop making such childish arguments. You should tell us that today the manner in which Mr. Nambi Narayan was hounded, the manner in which the Chandrayaan-2 was postponed for political reasons. Do you have any specific answers? Do you have answers as to why ISRO was not making any money? Today it has made 3,500 crores just by sending international satellites into space. Why wasn't all this done?
But
instead,
Shehzad,
you come here and you have a problem with Modi, but you take it out on ISRO.
As I insisted with the Congress about certain specific points that you had raised, Mr. Kamru's entire argument seems to be hinging on the fact that the last 20 seconds, why did the Prime Minister had to hog the limelight? That seems to be the problem of the opposition party.
Anusha, let me pose a question this way. 20 seconds before touchdown, it was actually a few minutes back that he joined, even though he was from BRICS.
Yes.
Did he know that it would make it safely? Of course, we backed our scientists, but anything could happen, right?
Yep.
The fact is that the Prime Minister is an accountable Prime Minister. The Prime Minister wants to lend his shoulder and say that, look, this is on me too. If it goes right, the credit is yours.
And even the last time when he failed in Chandrayaan-3.
What a courageous man that he stands by his scientists.
And nobody questioned his presence when the Chandrayaan-2 mission failed. So I believe that's another point that I'll discuss with the Congress
Absolutely,
party.
But they were ready to blame him.
But Mr. Selvamurthy and Jonathan Levy, gentlemen, please come into the discussion. Mr. Selvamurthy, how crucial and critical it is for the scientist community to have the right kind of political support. And when you witness this kind of credit war in the country going on, or this political debate that you've just heard on the broadcast tonight, your thoughts as a leading scientist, as somebody from the community?
Well, India is celebrating the groundbreaking, historic success which we have in this Chandrayaan-3 mission landing on the southern part of the moon. First of all, I want to thank all the countries which have been part of this success.
Sure.
They have helped in some way, passively, actively, whether it is NASA or it is Roscosmos or it is Australia, many countries. So I would like to express as a nation to gratitude to all those countries who have been part of this success. So I would say it's a success to the humanity, and it is also a success to our Indian scientists, the space scientists, the startups, the academia, and also the other stakeholders who have contributed to this big mission.
Sure.
So compliments.
Absolutely.
When you look at politicizing science is not desirable, because science is actually, it looks into the ultimate goal. It wants to discover science. So when I look at this, the government today, Narendra Modi ji, and is fully supportive of 100% support in terms of the financial resources, the moral support, the inspiration. Because this department, ISRO, comes directly under the PMO, Prime Minister's office.
Right.
And you have Dr. Jitendra Singh, who is looking after this as a minister.
Right.
So we have an ecosystem which directly gives patronage, the support. Wherever the chairman ISRO has a problem, he can immediately go to the minister and get this resolved or addressed. So I think this patronage which we see in this regime is very, very good. In terms of last 10 years, there is an exponential growth in terms of the ISRO programs, whether it is asset program of DRDO or it is the mission, Chandrayaan mission, Mars orbital mission.
Right.
All these have been fully supported, not only in terms of the financial resources, but also the direct support given to the scientists, and they are being with the scientists, which we could feel in this last 10 years.
All right.
And so I feel that this government has offered a wholehearted support, and Sri Narendra Modi ji, and his awareness, his perception, his understanding, grasp in any subject, including space, is very vast. He understands it.
Sir,
This also adds
you made an
value.
interesting point about the fact that science should not be politicized. But if one reads the history of space expeditions, space missions across the world, including countries like US and Russia, they've been politically very, very sensitive. I mean, in fact, they've been nationalized to a great extent. It's only in the last few decades that private sectors or the private players have started really coming into the space. Jonathan Levy, I want you to give your comments first on the fact that how keenly the entire world was watching when we achieved that success with Chandrayaan-3. The soft landing on the southern side of the moon that no other country has been able to achieve. And your thoughts, perhaps, on how much does political backing mean for scientists in the space sector or any other sector which is so critical?
Well, it's been very informative listening to the debate this evening, but from the outside looking in, the majority of the world sees this as an Indian achievement.
Absolutely.
And
please go ahead, sir. Can you hear me?
And I think that's very important.
Yeah.
So that reflects very, very well. So that's one point. And I think, as you mentioned, space is always politically charged in any country. It becomes sometimes something that is seen as too expensive, or that there ought to be more focus on less exotic missions. And through the years, through the different politics in different countries, this has always been something of a yo-yo. All I can say in terms of what India has achieved, that to use a space analogy, it's that rocket, isn't it? It's composed of various stages, which may have been, part of a different political journey at each stage, but ultimately the final thing is the success of landing on the moon and the advance in knowledge and engineering that's happened. I think you'll never take politics out of space.
Absolutely.
But as far as the scientists are concerned, I would imagine on the whole, they're just aiming to achieve more, discover more, and bring benefits back to Earth in one form or another.
And Jonathan, you very rightly said that it's utopian to imagine that politics can stay out, especially when it comes to the space science or the missions. One more comment I'd like from you. There was a specific comment that was made in the foreign press, I don't want to name any particular organization here, about the necessity of missions like these for countries like India, which are developing, where parts of the countries still struggle for the basic necessities. Should countries like India really aspire and spend money in this manner? Do you think that's even warranted?
Yes, I believe it should, as all countries should, because it inspires young people, first of all, to achieve more, to learn more and bring that back to the country. And every country, no matter at what level, whether they be very wealthy or not, they all have their struggles within their country. They all have poverty in many instances, even in the wealthiest of countries.
Absolutely.
And that should not be an excuse to prevent countries such as India from, moving forward, developing its knowledge, and the spin-off of that knowledge can come back to help the country. And even through space, tackling things like climate change, the impact on agriculture, all those things will bring benefits to all parts of the country. And I believe India, like any other country, should be allowed to have a program and to advance its knowledge and its achievements.
Well, absolutely. I smell a lot of envy when I hear those comments coming in from the so-called rich nations across the world. I want to bring in our political guests back into the discussion, Shehzad Poonawala and Kamru Chaudhary. As I take the closing comments from both of you, Shehzad, one of the arguments that the Congress party has made it that, you can criticize us for anything, but the key institutions in this country were made during the Congress era. And BJP has not been able to create any institution of anywhere close similar stature. Respond to that criticism.
That is an argument steeped in ignorance. Of course, because after independence, they got the first opportunity to rule. They created institutions. They created HAL. It was ignored. Today, HAL is record profit is being reported by HAL. They created LIC. Today, LIC has record profit. They created SBI. SBI has overtaken Reliance in its terms of being the biggest, most profitable company. Today, they have created BRO, ISRO. Those are in profit too, and they are making thousands and thousands of achievements every year. So of course, they created it, but they never took it to the size, scale, and depth that it should have been taken to. And just one word for the British, because in BBC I was hearing this.
Yes.
They should just realize that India has just overtaken the British and has become the 5th largest economy. And at the time when the British are being led by a man of Indian origin who feels proud to be a Sanatani, I think the British can do well if they return our $45 trillion which they looted from us. We'd give them $5 trillion to run affairs in BBC, and the rest can be put into their own other programs also. So I think that is for those who sit from outside and think it's not a function of the size of our wallet, it is the size of our ambitions, and India has arrived on the world stage. It's a hard entry with a soft landing.
And I think on that point, even the Congress party would agree. I think the political class at large would agree that these so-called rich nations don't have a right to lecture us about how India should use its brain and resources. Mr. Kamru Chaudhary, closing comments from you, please.
Yeah, exactly, Anusha, you are spot on. I remember those days when after I believe the nuclear test, ISRO was put under sanctions by the US along with the Russian space agency because of the cryogenic engine technology transfer that was happened.
Right.
So those were those days that India faced, and ultimately today we are able to set up Chandrayaan into the moon. That was itself a great achievement. This credit war that the Narendra Modi government, his minister and his spokesperson wants to take up is a zero argument for me, because we who follow closely the space program of our country today feel very proud. And I feel that Shahzad and his party should avoid and say that because of Narendra Modi this has happened and because of Narendra Modi we are going to do this. It's always 140 billion people that we are as a nation, and we feel proud today, Anusha, and that's my closing comments.
All right, Shahzad Poonawalla, Kamrul Chaudhary, Jonathan Levy and Mr. Selvam Murthy. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the broadcast. As it was